Okay, for part 3, we are going to, now that we have our average, we're going to determine what grade they get, and that's going to be this latter part here. Again, I said most of you don't understand why this is here, perhaps, but unless it's wrong, we don't change it. So sub is, whenever we left up here, sub was 4. We're reinitializing it back to 0. Execute the next line. Before we get into this, I want to real quick just recap how this works. In the book on page 230, they talk about parallel arrays, and they show an example of it here, and similar declarations over here and everything to what we've been doing. And the idea is that if, say item number 307 is what we're looking for, what we're requesting, then here's the price. So if it's valid item subscript 2, then it's valid price subscript 2. So I can search through this array until I find the correct item number, and then whatever subscript I'm on at that point. I can start with 0, and if that isn't right, I can go to 1. If that isn't right, I can go to 2. If I can go to 3, and that is right, I know that I can then access this other different array, but parallel array with the same subscript, and I'll get the right price. So it's just looking something up in it like a table basically. So here's some the flow chart and the pseudocode of doing that kind of thing. Have I found the correct item yet with this subscript? This is the subscript we're using a variable. If I found it, then good, and I'm going to say this is the price and so on. If I did not, I'm going to increment the subscript and go back. It's probably not perfectly structured the way I described that there, but that's essentially what we're trying to do. So let's go back and do this ourselves. So again, we had come across a loop control question. While average being 75, is less than ranges, this ranges array up here, remember, with a subscript of a variable called size. Well, I don't know of any variables called size, do you? We have a variable called sub that we happen to just reinitialize, and also happens to be the subscript that we use here in this other array. So I don't know of any way really for you to definitively know that that's the right answer, but I think a little bit of browsing, some common sense kind of should lead you towards that answer, mainly just based off of this. If you understand the idea that we're looking up a parallel array, then you know, oh, well, down here, this is what I use, so I have to use the same variable, same subscript. So that's what we're going to use here. Now that I have that, I should be able to know what this is. Again, I left this code up here for you just to help a little bit, but since I'm going to continue using these callouts, I'm going to go ahead and remove this for now. We have sub is equal to 0, so we know ranges with a subscript of 0 is 90. So this is going away, and we will now work with it in our heads. 90, while 75 is less than 90, well, it is, so we execute the body. Sub was 0, we added 0 plus 1 is 1. We go back, we ask it again. 75 less than, now what is this number? Sub is now equal to 1, so that means ranges subscript 1. Well, ranges subscript 1 is 80. So is 75 less than 80? It is. We will add another 1 to sub, and sub becomes 2. While average 75 is less than ranges subscript 3, which is 70. I'm sorry, subscript 2, I apologize. The third element of the array is subscript 2. And 75 is not less than 70, so we would be done. We would go down to the next line of code. This code, first of all, letter grade. We need to do a variable check. Letter grade, is it spelled the same? Well, it doesn't exist. Undeclared variables are a huge mistake. So we will go up here, and since we have, well, doesn't really matter where we put it, but since We have our other working variables here for the name and the score. We'll put it here, string letter grade. Seems like a decent place for it for me. So now we've got it. Now it's declared. Now it's spelled the same. Good job. Okay. Now we're going to use the variable sub to access the grades array. Again, that same subscript that it was, we left it at 2, right? Because that's where we found this false and we went on. So subscript 2 means the third element of the array, which is C. So if they got a 75, they get a C. We know that to be correct. So based on that, we'll put out their name, Bob, got a C. Alright. We now ask the same question again that we asked during the priming input, and we receive something. They may say ZZZZ. Doesn't matter what they say, we still have to go back up here and ask this question again. So, we have found several bugs as we've gone through this. There is yet a bug that, or actually 2 bugs in this case, that we have. There's one bug that we didn't solve properly because we put this up here, and we'll see in a moment why that's not correct. And then there's a bug that we haven't found yet. And this is why it's very important to follow every logical path throughout the program. Just because you step through it once, which took a significant amount of time, obviously, and some thinking and step by step, but that still doesn't mean you fixed everything. You got to allow for all the different possibilities. Right now, we've only allowed for an average score of 75, and we've pretty much checked everything else, but we didn't check the different possibilities on the scores. So let's go back through and do that. Let's also see what happens when they've entered one student and they want to enter another one before quitting the program. So we've gone back up here. Let's think about our variables. Variable, this is new now. We just got a new value for it from the user. Letter grade is currently set to C. Sub is currently set to the number 2. Total is currently set to 300 from earlier when we were doing this calculation. Average is currently set to 75, and I guess that pretty well covers our working variables. So we have some leftover data in the program. Now we're going to see that most of that gets written back over, but that's part of having things in the proper places. Immediately we reset total back to 0 when we get in, assuming they did not do the ZZ. We'll say this time they typed Randy. How about Randy? I don't know. So total was 300 just a moment ago. As I said, now it's 0. So we've reinitialized it. That's good. Now we want to see while sub is less than num test. Well, as I just said, sub is currently 2. So 2 is less than 4. Good. We enter a score and so on. But as you should realize right now, that's going to create a problem. We're going to enter 2 scores, and then it's going to be more than num tests, and we're going to go on with just 2 scores. That's incorrect. That's why I said this does not go up here. It has to go right here, right before we actually use it to be initialized. We could initialize it both places, but it just becomes superfluous to have it initialized up top. So this is the place that it belongs, because it needs to be reset back to 0 before we use it as a counter for this loop, just like it had to be reset back to 0 before we used it to search the array. So that is the proper place. Now we have properly fixed that bug, but there is still one more bug, and I'm going to try to get this in this video, so I'm going to have to hurry here. We know this part works basically. Now that this has been fixed, this is going to work. We're going to get 4 scores. We're going to put it in here. We're going to divide it by 4. We're going to that's all good and well and whatever. So let's look at what happens when we search the array based on different average values for average. So let's say average is 90, the minimum for an A. Or anything higher than 90, but let's try 90. If 90, we reset sub to 0 right before we got here. So this, again, remember, is ranges subscript what? 0. So that means it's 90. So is 90 less than 90? Well, no, it's not. So we would not execute the body of the loop. We would skip down here, we would assign letter grade, which prior to this point it was C, but doesn't matter because we're assigning over top of it again. So that's not a problem. We're going to assign grades with a subscript of 0 because we didn't change what subscript was. Well, that means that they get an A. So 90, and obviously anything above 90 is also not less than 90, so we know that works. We can apply that to 89 and know that of course 89 is less than 90, and so that gets incremented, but then it's not less than 80, nor is any number between 89 and 80, so that's going to work properly, and so on. We know that that's the good logic. Somebody mentioned this needed to be less than or equals, but that obviously would not be correct because, well, because of what I just showed you basically, if you really follow the math. So let's follow this on up. Let's say they got, for instance, a 55, a little bit less than a D, so a mid-range there for the F. 55 would prove to be less. We increment this, let's say, all the way up to 3, which would access the 4th element of the array, and it would be it would still be less than 60. So we would increment it one more time to 4 to access the 5th element of the array, which is 50. And 55 was not less than 50, so we would go on and assign grades with a subscript of 4, which is F, and they get an F. Great. What if they do even worse? What if they get like a 45 or like a 0? Well, if they get even just like a 45, 45 is less than 50. So that would not evaluate false as it needed to. We would increment subscript. We would come back to this question, and this time we would be using a subscript of 5. There is no ranges subscript 5, which would be a 6th element. There is none. So it would be the same as an undeclared variable. It would crash the program. So that obviously is a problem. We need to allow for the entire possible range. And the program doesn't really specify this, but I'm just using common sense to say it's going to be anything all the way down to 0. So it's actually a very simple solution to this, because if we change this bottom number, we already know that if they get like a 55 or 59 or anything in that range, they're going to get an F. The problem is that anything below this number, it tries to go beyond it. So this number actually needs to be the bottom of that range. See, this number is always the bottom of whatever range it refers to. It's the bottom of the A's, it's the bottom of the B's, it's the bottom of the C's, just because of how this is coded here. So 60 is the bottom of the D's. Well, this number needs to be the bottom of the F's range. Well, the F range is 0 to 59. So quite simply, this needs to be 0. And we can test that simply by putting 0 in average and say, well, they got 0 on all their tests. Well, even then, 0 is not less than 0. So we would not increment. It would still come out false. We would not increment. We would go down here and assign the corresponding letter grade with that subscript of 4. So I hope that all made sense. These were much longer tutorials than I'd hoped, but this is a little bit more complicated, and I understand if you guys still have questions, and I would be more than happy to answer them. So let me know, and I will see you next time. Thanks.